The Tarnished is one of the most disappointing protagonists FromSoft has ever made. And no, this isn't about power. The Tarnished steamrolls demigods by dozens and kills literal avatars of cosmic order. So, you know, we're good. Everyone with half a brain cell can see he is the strongest protag. The problem is that the Tarnished has no reason to do any of it at all. Eldenring is the most narratively ambitious game FromSoft has ever built. 6 endings, dozens of quest lines, a world so dense with history that people are still arguing about what the greater will actually is 3 years later. And standing in the center of it all is a protagonist with the personality of a garden rake, a divine cruise missile guided by a dead god's GPS system, pointed at problems with zero opinions about any of it. Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. FromSoftWare spent 15 years making some of the best games ever made, while systematically refusing to write protagonists. These are not characters, they are GoPros attached to you, the player. Something more akin to hollow vessels you pour yourself into, and that works great for immersion, but it's terrible for storytelling. And the second you stop ranking these protagonists by how many gods they can kill and start ranking them by something insane, I don't know, like whether they have a personality or not, the entire lists collapse in ways that are going to make some of you genuinely angry. So here's what we're doing. 8 protagonists, 8 games, 1 question. Who actually has an arc? The Tarnished lands near the bottom, and by the time we're done, you're going to understand exactly why the best protagonist FromSoft ever wrote isn't even technically part of the Souls games. Before we start, we need to define what best narrative actually means, because if you're coming at this thinking I'm ranking the game by which has the best lore, you're going to be confused. Every FromSoft game has incredible lore. That's not what we're doing. What I'm looking at is simple. Does the protagonist have agency? Do they make choices that matter? Or do they just walk forward and kill whatever's in front of them? Because here's the pattern, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Almost every FromSoft protagonist is following orders, albeit from a maiden or a prophecy or some stupid glowing line on a map. Someone else decided the destination, and you're just the wrecking ball sent in to do the dirty work. The difference between a good protagonist and a bad one isn't how hard their boss fights are. It's whether they had a reason to be in that boss fight at all. So we're measuring 4 things. Does the protagonist actually make a choice, or does the game make every choice for them? Does the journey connect to what the game is actually about, or are they just a tourist stumbling through someone else's story? Do they change? Is the person at the end of the game different from the person at the start? Now, this last one is one that's going to cause the problems. Do they have an actual relationship? No quest lines where someone talks at them while they're standing there silently. Real, defined connections to other characters that shape their decisions. If that sounds simple, it's because it is. And that's exactly why so many of these protagonists fail at it. And starting up, I'm sorry, but it's the Slayer of Demons, and it isn't ranked last because Demon Souls is bad. Demon Souls is a masterpiece in its own right. The Slayer is ranked last because they are a rough draft of what a person is supposed to be. Demon Souls is a story about greed. King Alolant wanted power he had no right to. He made a deal with something ancient and hungry and watched his entire kingdom dissolve into fog because of it. That is a genuinely compelling premise with many different paths that could have happened. And the Slayer, well, he has nothing to do with any of it. He didn't cause the greed. He doesn't represent its consequences. And he most certainly doesn't carry any of its weight. The theme is a wildfire burning through Boletaria, and the Slayer is just some person standing in a field nearby watching it happen. And here's the part that actually kills the whole thing. The Slayer didn't even choose to be there. I mean, yeah, they went to help Boletaria, but let's face it, they wandered into the fog, died, got their soul bounded to the Nexus, and then the last monumental, an ancient creature that has been sitting in that building for centuries, told them, hey, go kill some demons. That's the mission, and it's the entire origin. A prisoner handed a sword by something that had been waiting for anyone willing to do their bidding. You could replace the Slayer with a motivated mailman and the story could be identical. The Monumental doesn't care who you are. The Nexus doesn't care who you are. The game doesn't care who you are. The war just needed a body with a soul that could hold on to a weapon and beat back demons. There's no version of the protagonist that changes between that opening and the final boss. No relationship that costs them anything. The Maiden in Black is the closest thing to a meaningful human connection in the game, and her primary function is the level up screen. What actually makes this interesting, and I mean this genuinely, is that the Slayer is a proof of concept. Every blank slate protagonist FromSoft has written since is either a refinement of this template or a direct reaction against it. You can't fault a first draft for not being a finished product. The Slayer didn't fail, FromSoftware just hadn't figured out where these games were going yet. The problem is that some of their later protagonists clearly didn't get upgraded from this. Speaking of that, we have the Ashen one, and they're ranked above the Slayer of Demons for exactly one reason. Dark Souls 3 at least had an idea. Here's the premise. You're unkindled. A person who's already failed. Someone who already tried to link the flame and you couldn't do it, and you burned away to nothing. Not the chosen hero, the B team. The corpse that got dug up because everyone on the A roster apparently called in sick or decided to fuck off to places nowhere. This is a genuinely interesting foundation for a protagonist. The weight on your shoulders of being a bench warmer called up to action, which I mean, I watched a bunch of sports movies in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I get that underdog feeling. Resurrected not because you're the best option, but because the deadline moved up and there was nobody better available. Dark Souls 3 introduces this in the opening and it never brings it up again. Not once does the Ashen one reckon with what it means to be a failure, handed a second chance. No relationship is shaped by it. No moment in the story costs them anything because of it. It exists as a concept that got mistaken for characterization and then got quietly left on a drawer somewhere near Firelink Shrine. What's left is a protagonist walking through one of the most visually spectacular games FromSoft has ever built and leaving zero fingerprints on any of it. The world is collapsing in on itself, the Fire Lords are losing their minds. And the Ashen One's contribution to all of this is to keep moving in a forward direction. Look, I understand that walking is a skill that not everyone has, but the Lord of the Rings kind of carved out a corner in the walking fantasy drama, and I don't think our hero here has a chance of snagging it for himself. The Ashen One, however, was supposed to be something more than that, and the game just forgot. It's like FromSoft left what he was supposed to be on the cutting room floor. Now, I said there was a protagonist on this list who does some of the same things as the Ashen One and earns it. The Tarnished earns it. That still only gets them to 6th in our ranking. Look guys, as I looked at the criteria that I set for this list, I was surprised also. We all know that the Tarnished is the strongest. And this game was what got me back into FromSoftware games. The reason I went back and beat all the others that came before it. But here's the difference. The Ashen One's emptiness is a mistake, a compelling premise that got abandoned in the opening cutscene and never came back. The Tarnished emptiness is a feature, guided by grace, drawn forward by a dead god's divine distress signal. A hollow vessel built specifically for a game that wants you to construct your own meaning inside a shattered cosmology. The accumulation of everything FromSoft has ever put together. The perfect blank slate that you can project yourself onto for your power fantasy. And it still doesn't work, because intentional emptiness is still emptiness. The most interesting character in Eldenring is Marika, whose tragedy is already finished before you arrive. The second most interesting is Ronnie, who has a centuries-long plan that requires you specifically as a tool, not as a person. And the third most interesting is Melina, who burns herself alive at the Forge of the Giants, and the Tarnished has nothing to say about it. She dies and you walk into the Erd Tree. The game and the Tarnished moves on like it didn't affect them one bit, and that is the single most damning thing you can say about any protagonist. The person who chose to help you dies for you, and the character whose story you're supposedly living has zero response to it. The 6 endings are real and genuinely impressive. 6 different visions for what the world becomes, but they are not character development. They are consequences for the world, not transformations of the Tarnished. You don't grow into them. You don't earn them through who you've become. The Tarnished is the same person crawling out of that grave at the start of the game as they are standing at the Erd tree at the end of it. The closest argument you can give me is the Frenzied Flame ending, and to me, even that was a choice that was set up by 𝐕𝐸 that you as the player thought would be a better way than the others to go out on. Ranni's ending is the most thematically coherent through all of Eldenring. Freedom from the greater will, a moon of her own, the stars unshackled from cosmic order. Beautiful. Ranni thought of it, planned it across multiple lifetimes, and built every piece of it herself. The Tarnished job was to survive long enough to get handed a ring. And look, I know some of you are already typing, but I felt something for Ranni right now. You did. I did also. That was something that was real. But be honest with yourself. That was you feeling something for Ranni, not the Tarnished. The Tarnished is a blank slate, and you projected yourself into them. You put the ring on because you care about her, not because the Tarnished does. There's no evidence anywhere in the game that the Tarnished has a single genuine emotion towards her or anyone. The connection you felt, you built that. FromSoft built a world compelling enough for you to do the work, and you did it, which is actually impressive game design, but it's still not a damn protagonist. The Tarnished is not the protagonist of Eldenring. The Tarnished is how you access the protagonist of Eldenring. Marika, Ranni, Godfrey, Miquella, they have arcs, they carry weight, they live with consequences. The Tarnished is the camera that moves between them. That's a valid way to design an overarching game narrative, but it's a bad way to write a protagonist. The Chosen Undead, however, is where FromSoft first figured out what they were actually doing. Dark Souls is a game about cycles, a dying fire, a world that keeps going through the same ritual of sacrifice because nobody has the courage to let it end. The Chosen Undead doesn't just inhabit that theme, they are that theme. Marked by the dark sign, told by prophecy that their destiny is to feed themselves to a flame that has already killed everyone who came before. The entire design of Dark Souls 1 points directly at the Chosen Undead and says, you are the person this broken world needs to consume next. And that's not nothing. That's actually a meaningful place to put a protagonist. And here's where it gets interesting. Kingseeker Framp tells you to link the fire. Darkstalker Kaith tells you to let it die. 2 ancient serpents, 2 completely opposite instructions, both claiming to have your best interests in mind. And both are lying to your face. And the Chosen Undead has to stand there like, okay, so the giant snake and the other giant snake are both telling me different things, and somehow I'm supposed to figure out which apocalypse is the correct one. That is closer to a genuine agency than anything the Tarnished gets for like 6 hours. And then there's hollowing, the mechanic that nobody talks about enough. The Chosen Undead doesn't just risk death, they risk losing themselves. Go hollow and you lose humanity. That's not just a resource, but that's your identity. Your character literally degrades. FromSoft encoded the character arc directly into the game's systems. The journey of the Chosen Undead is about whether you maintain your humanity while the world throws everything it has at you. The mechanics are the arc. That's genuinely elegant design, and also genuinely miserable to experience, which is the Dark Souls brand promise, and it's been delivered. Slayer of Astora finds the sun and then he loses it. Then you go and watch him go hollow in Lost Izalith. Or you save him if you know the right path. Which you absolutely did not on your first playthrough, don't lie to me. Either way, that questline has more emotional weight than most games manage with a full voiced cast, but it belongs to Slayer. The Chosen Undead is the person standing next to him when that happens, unable to say a word about it. Which is the ceiling. The Chosen Undead lives in a world built from genuine tragedy, has access to real choices with real stakes, and carries a mechanic that functions as an actual internal arc. Everything is in place. The only missing piece is a protagonist who can respond to any of it. Being emotionally moved by Dark Souls 1 is real for some of you, and some of you have a Slayer tattooed somewhere on your body right now, and I respect that completely. I genuinely do, but please, I don't want to see it. That emotion comes from the world. It doesn't come from the character you're playing. 5th place, the foundation was always there. Someone was eventually going to build something on it. You know who's not in 5th place? The Hunter. And here's something the Bloodborne community doesn't talk about enough. You came to Yharnam on purpose. Not because Grace was pulling you. Not because prophecy had your name on it. You showed up voluntarily, you signed some damn paperwork, you asked a stranger to inject foreign blood directly into your blood vein in a city that was already kind of on fire. Whatever happens next, at least, is partially on you, and that's not an insult, that's the entire point. The Hunter is the only FromSoft protagonist in this list so far who walked into their story with something resembling intent. Bloodborne is a game about the cost of forbidden knowledge. You come to Yharnam looking for something. The exact reason is yours to decide. But the game doesn't let that ambiguity get in the way of consequence. The deeper you go, the more the city reveals itself as a place where curiosity doesn't get rewarded, it gets punished, transformed, consumed, and the Hunter is not exempt from any of that. The Beast Plague isn't something happening around you, it's something happening to you in real time, whether you notice it or not. Gehrman is the relationship that makes this section worth writing. An old hunter trapped in the dream that was built to protect you, who has been waiting so long that the protection became its own kind of prison. He wants to release you, not because he doesn't care, because he cares too much and he has ran out of any other way to show it. That's a real dynamic. That's a mentor relationship with actual weight underneath of it. And the hunter's response to it? Fight him, accept him, or transcend the whole situation entirely. And that's a character statement. 3 different answers to the same question about what you're willing to become. That's the arc. The hunter starts as someone who hunts beasts. They end the game either dying in a field, ascending to something that isn't human anymore, or waking up in Yharnam that survived the night. Every ending is a transformation of sorts. Every ending says something about what the hunter decided knowledge was worth. That's thematic coherence working exactly the way it's supposed to. The plain doll loves you unconditionally and without reservation, by the way. She tells you this every time you level up, just standing there in a garden full of graves, being genuinely happy you came back. I'm not saying that this is the most emotionally devastating thing in any FromSoft game. I'm just saying I've never once left the hunter's dream without feeling slightly guilty about how quickly I ran past her to hit the level up menu. 4th place, because the dream structure does some of the heavy lifting the hunter should be doing themselves. The pale blood hunt, the nightmare logic, the way the world reshapes itself around you, it's gorgeous. But it occasionally lets the protagonist coast on the atmosphere instead of action. The hunter has one of the strongest arcs in the list. They just share some of the credit with Yharnam itself. 4th place, the city does half the work, the hunter does the other half, and that half is pretty damn good. But moving on to 3rd place, we have Dark Souls 2. Depending on who you ask, this is the worst game FromSoftWare has ever made. No Miyazaki, the wrong tone, the lore doesn't connect cleanly enough, and the hitboxes were a crime against humanity. The discourse has been settled by committee, and when it comes to the story building, the character development, well, the committee was wrong. The Bearer of the Curse is the top 3 FromSoft protagonists. These 2 facets coexist, and they're going to bother you until you sit down with them for a few minutes. Here's what Dark Souls 2 understood that the rest of the trilogy fumbled. Hollowing isn't just a game mechanic, it's a character condition. Every death in Dark Souls 2 costs something. Maximum health, slowly, run by run, fight by fight. You are visibly deteriorating. The Bearer of the Curse isn't a hero on a journey. They're someone trying not to disappear. That is the arc of this game. The character has stakes to face. And then, the game does something very strange. It gives you a quest to find 4 ancient crowns, one for each of the great kingdoms that fell before yours. Not to gain power or become more than yourself, but to understand what hollowing truly is. Learn from every king who lost that fight and come out on the other side immune to it. Let's face it, you're not immune because you were chosen. You're immune because you put the damn work in. You went to the places where civilizations collapsed, figured out why, and refused to repeat it. And that is the most coherent character through line in the entire Dark Souls trilogy. A person who, actively falling apart, decided mechanically, narratively, and systematically that they refused to go hollow, and then they proved it. Vendrick didn't do this, by the way. Vendrick is what happens when you just stop. He's shuffling around in the basement in the dark, hollowed down to nothing. He put aside his armor, his wife, his kingdom, and made the hollowing issue someone else's problem. A king who had every resource the bearer is scraping for sat down anyway, and he's not really a boss. He's a cautionary tale that wandering into the wrong room and staying there can make you. And the bearer looks at him and loots the area and just keeps on moving. The Emerald Herald exists to be used and discarded. That's literally what she was made for. She says it herself, and she stays anyway. She believes in the bearer anyway. Pours everything she has into someone who might just hollow out before the credits roll, and she is, inexplicably, the most emotionally honest companion FromSoft has ever written. Nito never did this. Patches could never do this. And then you reach 𝐓𝐷IA. 𝐓𝐷IA is the only moment in Dark Souls trilogy where the cycle gets talked back to directly. Not symbolically, not through an ending screen. The bearer of the curse stands in front of something ancient and hungry and tells it they are not playing. No lord, no throne, no destiny, just a person who went through the entire machine, understood what it was, and walked out the other side. The 𝐓𝐷IA ending isn't a power move, it's knowing that all players in the grand game have been duped and learning your own path. Now, Dark Souls 3 came out. It told a sweeping, beautiful story about the end of the Age of Fire, and it brought back 𝐷𝐤𝐼𝐼's daughter. It gave us Slave Knight Gale, and it did a lot of things very well, but it also quietly took Dark Souls 2, put it in a box, slid it underneath their bed, and decided to never mention it again. The geography doesn't connect, the lore references are minimum, and the characters who survived DS2 are functionally absent. What Dark Souls 3 was saying explicitly in the subtext, in the structure, is that Dark Souls 2's story was a detour, not really canon, not part of a real arc, a thing that happened somewhere to someone that didn't matter enough to carry forward. The bearer of the curse told the cycle to go to hell, and the franchise said, okay, but we're just going to pretend that you didn't. That's not a mark against the bearer, that's proof of exactly how good this story was. Dark Souls 3 couldn't build on it, so it had to fucking restart. But you know what didn't have to restart? FromSoft's best character work is not even in one of the Souls games, and it's not in a game about undead kingdoms or moon logic or even cosmic horror fishing villages. It's in a game about mercenary pilot murdering private military companies with a robot the size of a building. Armored Core 6 has no business being this good at character writing, and yet Raven starts the game as a weapon. This is not a metaphor, he's literally a hound, a weapon for whoever handles him. Handler Walter puts a near-dead pilot out in medical stasis, wires them into a corporate asset, points them at a planet. The arrangement is transactional, and Walter is honest about that, which is almost worse. You aren't really a hero, you're definitely not the chosen. You're a contractor with a kill switch and a bill to run up. Every faction of Rubicon wants the same thing from Raven: compliance. Arquebus wants a weapon, Balaam wants a weapon, the Rubicons want a symbol, which is just a weapon with fancy branding. Even Walter, the closest thing Raven has to a mentor, wants a weapon. The entire first playthrough is Raven performing the function everyone assigned them, and it ends badly because it was always going to end badly, because that's what happens when you let other people define what you're for. The arc isn't told in cutscenes. They aren't monologues about identity and purpose. Raven's character development is in what they chose to do when the mission changes, and nobody is telling them what to do next. The moment Raven stops executing orders and starts making calls is quiet, and it happens fast. If you blink, you miss what it means. But here's the thing, the name does a lot of heavy lifting. 621 is a serial number. It's what Walter called you before you were a person. Raven is what you become. In the beginning, you're called it due to stealing the ID and license of a fallen merc. But as the game goes on, you defeat the real Raven. The Rubicons give it to you because of what you do, because of what they see in you, because you earned a reputation. You are the champion of free will that the world needs. The rename in the arc is 5 letters. You stopped being an asset and you became an avatar of sorts. Ahri is the reason that decision matters. Walter, well, he's duty, structure, the mission, the logic of the world as it exists. Ahri is possibility, what Rubicon could be, what Raven could be, if the old machinery just stopped. The tension between them isn't a love triangle, and it's not some political debate. It's a question. Which version of you do you want to be? The Fires of Raven ending is Raven answering that question out loud for the first time. It's not the good ending by any conventional metric. You're burning down the coral construct, severing a connection Ahri built, making a call that costs something real, but it's Raven's call, damn it. Not Walter's, not Arquebus, not the greater will's GPS coordinated, handed down through some grace. Raven looks at a situation, weighs it, and then acts upon his own will. And that's agency, something that many of the characters on this list do not have. Actual, specific, costly agency with consequences Raven has to own. There's also something quietly unhinged about the fact that the most emotionally coherent FromSoft protagonist is a person who never speaks in a game with no Westus flasks, whose main form of self-expression is flying a 100-meter death machine through a corporate headquarters at Mach speeds, and it still has more integrity than half the RPG protagonists released that year. AC6 did not come to play, it just showed up as the best thing you had to see. Raven lands at number 2 for the same reason the Bearer almost made number 1. The arc is earned, not given. The identity is built like your armored core unit. It is not assigned. And when the ending comes, it actually means something. Not because some prophecy said it would, but because Raven decided it would. Well guys, we've made it through all of the others. There's only one left, and it's Wolf. Wolf is the only FromSoft protagonist who has an opinion. And that sounds like a low bar, and it is. It's astronomically a low bar. And he still laps the entire list. Sekiro is the outlier in FromSoft's category for one specific reason that has nothing to do with the combat or the grappling hook or the fact that it will end your bloodline if you rush it. It has a protagonist who speaks and reacts, who has a defined relationship with another character that the entire game is structurally built around protecting. Wolf doesn't exist to be a vessel for the player's projection. Wolf is a shinobi. He has a lord and a code. He has a father who betrayed him. These are not variables you fill in yourself. They're load-bearing facts about who this person is before you ever picked up your controller. Kuru is the center of gravity for everything Wolf does. And the game earns that relationship by showing you what it costs. Not cutscenes of Wolf monologuing about loyalty. Actual costs. Al is Wolf's master, his father figure, and the man who raised and trained him and gave him his name. And Wolf kills him. Twice across the game's timeline, actually. Because Kuru asked him to choose, and Wolf chose Kuru. That moment of killing Al isn't a boss fight that happens to you. It's a declaration of what Wolf is and who he belongs to, and the game lets it hurt. The sculptor exists to show what Wolf becomes if that loyalty breaks. An old man with one arm, a hut full of bad memories, a demon that ate everything he used to be. That's Wolf's failure state. With a name and a backstory, FromSoft didn't just write Wolf. They wrote a version of Wolf that lost, gave him a supporting role, and made sure you understood the stakes. And then there's the purification ending. Kuro wants to die as a mortal. He wants the dragon's heritage to end with him, wants to stop being a burden wrapped in a child's body, and wants Wolf to let him go. Every protective instinct Wolf has says no. Every shinobi code Wolf was raised on says protect the Lord at all costs, and Wolf does it anyway. He grants Kuro's wish, not because prophecy told him to, not because grace pointed him in that direction, but because Wolf looked at the person he'd built his entire existence around protecting and decided that protecting someone sometimes means letting them choose their own end. A loyal hound who follows orders, a shinobi who chooses his lord over his master, a man who grants his lord the death he asked for. 3 turns, each one costing more than the last, Each one hits Wolf more and more by the end, and the game made every single one of them land. And then there's the other ending, the one where Wolf doesn't make the noble call, the surer path, as Wolf looking at everything Kuro represents, the code, the loyalty, and the cost, and choosing Al anyway, choosing blood. The corruption takes him, the humanity drains out, and then Wolf just kills everyone in his path, including Genichiro, including old Ashen. And then there's the ending where Wolf fucks off to the mainland, he goes to Korea, and as the community has helpfully summarized, returns the immortality to where it belongs, finding a way to be true to his master and his nindo, his ninja way. Just Wolf losing and the game being completely honest about what that looks like. The sculptor's entire arc exists as a flash forward to that version of Wolf in 20 years with nothing left, no face, no name, just violence stuck in a loop. FromSoft did write Wolf's failure state as a supporting character and made you watch it shuffle around the map before you ever reached the point of no return. And that ambiguity, that's the consequences with prep work behind it. However, Wolf wins because he's the only protagonist here who could make the wrong call and have the narrative assign him full responsibility for it. The story doesn't soften it. There's no tragic framing that lets you feel okay with the surer path. You failed. Wolf failed. The game knows the difference. 8 games, 8 protagonists, and one who lands on top is a man with a sword, a dead lord, and exactly one opinion that cost him everything. That opinion was worth it. Subscribe if you want more of this, like the video if you agree Wolf deserves the top spot, or like it anyway while you're typing out your furious disagreements in the comment sections. Either one works with me. The algorithm doesn't check your intentions. More ranking videos, more deep dives, more extremely specific opinions delivered at you with full confidence. That's what this channel is. You found it, stick around. And remember guys, like always, be good to each other. See you in the next video. Peace.